Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started here in just 1 minute. Okay, so it looks like we have a few of us, so thank you for joining us this afternoon. We'd like to kick off this Lunch and Learn presented by DynamicPoint, leverage Office 365 for portals, invoice automation, and employee expense management, presented by Mike Marson. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Shauna. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for joining. We'll get you kicked off. And before we do, just a reminder, at the end of the session, if you could just take a couple seconds, we do have the star rating that you will find under the session description. So please rate your session at the end, and we'll leave it to Mike.
Thank you so much. Thanks for getting things kicked off. Appreciate everyone joining our session today. As Shauna mentioned, today we are going through using Office 365 for various basically business app applications. We're going to showcase a portal as well as an invoice automation on the AP vendor invoice side, and then look briefly at employee expense. We only have a half an hour today, so we're going to move through it pretty quick. So thank you everyone for joining. Shauna and I were talking about everyone's background. The disclaimer is I'm in California and space is a little bit of a commodity. So yes, that is my kitchen. And you probably can't read it, but that's my kids' chore list. So please, excuse my use of space here. It's obviously I'm typically in an office, but I don't have a dedicated one because I would have to kick a kid out of the room and I don't think they would be pleased with that. So anyway, excuse the background. I was thinking about trying to put up some fake, background or whatever, but then said, hopefully everyone would be a little bit accommodating with the situation. Okay, so to get things started, we're going to go over a couple PowerPoint slides as well as a quiz just to get a poll of everyone. And then we're going to spend the majority of the time looking at these applications that we want to showcase today and just look at the various Office 365 functionality that can be used in conjunction with them. So the disclaimer is, I'm obviously showcasing some of our products today as well. Yes, we are a vendor. The good news is that I'm trying not to make this an entire sales pitch. There's so much of what I'm showing you today that you could absolutely use just Office 365. So know that we're there. Obviously, we're trying to increase awareness, but so much of what I'm showcasing today could just use the Office 365 platform, assuming that you already own it, which I'm assuming most of us do. But actually, that takes us to our first agenda item here is we wanted to start it off with a little quiz and see how many people are using Office 365 at your company. That'll help me gauge the rest of the presentation. If you don't mind doing a quick answer on that. Okay, so based on the attendees, looks like most everyone has it. And are you using it to the best of its capability? It looks like that's a general, not really at best, right? Some no's, some meh, sort ofs, but for the most part, we could all agree that it comes with all these features and functionality, and we're probably not leveraging it to the most of its capacity. So if anything, hopefully after this half an hour, you'll get some ideas of how you can use it to its capabilities. So we'll go ahead and move on from that quiz. Thank you everyone for participating. And we are going to go right to a PowerPoint presentation. And as I mentioned, a few slides here, but nothing hopefully too laborious. And then we're going to go start showing the different applications that we're showcasing today. We're going to start it off with portals and then go into invoice automation and then barely end it on expense just because we don't have too much time. And I'd rather go into the depth on those first two. And by the time you understand those first two, I think expense will make more sense as we go through it. So a brief introduction of who is DynamicPoint. We've been around for over a decade now, and our focus has always been basically working with the Dynamics products, and obviously more recently Dynamics 365, given that it hasn't been around for a decade, and extending that historically with SharePoint applications. And what SharePoint means, obviously the product has been around for a long time, but it has seen a lot of development, as we all know, and that has changed our app architecture significantly. So what we used to do back in the day was build these applications on top of SharePoint server and deploy them onto your farm, right? So you had a server set up, we would deploy a product, install it on the on-premise server, and then obviously that would run an application that ultimately integrated with the predecessors to Dynamics 365, such applications as GP, AX, NAV, and as well as we do SL too. But so those are the predecessors. Those were the applications that we integrated with. As about 5 years ago, as Office 365 is gaining steam, we decide to re-architect all of our applications on this Office 365 framework. So it's most certainly a change for us in that we've been around for, like I said, a decade, but our applications are all recently redeveloped on this new architecture. So hopefully you're seeing the latest and greatest here. And if we did our job, we took the know-how and the knowledge of our products and doing this for the past decade and have incorporated that into the new framework. As far as our lineup, again, and this is also our agenda, a portal. Portal is the idea of taking a SharePoint extranet page, an Office 365 SharePoint. And no, I will probably say Office 365 for the duration of this presentation. The way Microsoft has it is you could still run all of that functionality on premise too. So even though I'll say Office 365, if you happen to have all of this installed on premise, the app architecture and the model is the same. But for the sake of simplicity, I'll probably continue to say Office 365. But anyway, the idea there is that it's taking a collaboration portal, which is something that we, again, can't take credit for. This is very much something that's being pushed from Microsoft in competing with other applications such as Dropbox and things like that. They are taking the Office 365 SharePoint portal concept and allowing it to be shared with external users, customers, vendors, or internally with employees. That's obviously the more traditional use of SharePoint. And then they're allowing you to do that without a license for the external users. So you could share this portal concept, bring in customers and vendors, and they get this special type of license, which is considered an external user, which is no cost to you, right? Or no additional cost. It comes with your standard licensing. We have an invoice and AP automation that, again, is leveraging that framework. It's going to take an invoice, take it into an Office 365 library, route it for approval. Of course, for that approval, we're going to use Flow, or now known as Power Automate, and then ultimately assign accounts, do such things as PO matching using the data in Dynamics 365, and then ultimately integrate that as an invoice. And then lastly is the employee expense. And it's the same concept, but obviously geared towards employee expense receipts as opposed to invoices coming from AP. So in that case, I'm taking a picture from my phone, bringing that into the system, maybe using a Power App on my mobile, ultimately routing it for approval using Power Automate. And then lastly, coming into the system as an invoice. Of course, I'm not paying a vendor in that case, I'm paying an employee for reimbursement. So that's the lineup for today. Sort of what makes this all different, from an app architecture company, the analogy I like to use for us is it's very similar. This whole ecosystem that Microsoft is providing is very similar to the world of our mobile phones. When we install an app on our mobile phone, the first thing that it asks us, which we're probably all familiar with, is can I use all these things? And these things that it's asking us is such things as the camera, the location services, the calling capability, etc. The list goes on, which you're probably all aware of. And the reason those apps do that, of course, is because it makes their product more functional, and they didn't have to build any of that. So we are taking that same approach. But our platform, of course, is not an iPhone or an Android. It is Office 365. So in our world, we build these products on top of our framework, DynamicPoint. And then when it comes to the installation method, moving on to the second box here, we're installed as a SharePoint app, right? And there's really no quote unquote install other than adding that app to your ad catalog. So there's no hardware or physical install associated to it. It's just like adding an app to your phone. For workflow, we are using Power Automate or Flow. For mobile applications, we're using Power Apps. For capturing data, we're using Forms. For analytics, we're using Power BI. So again, just as a device on your mobile phone leverages all this functionality, so are we, but our platform, of course, is Office 365. Keep it moving. So the first use case or product that we wanted to showcase here is using this framework of this Office 365 as a portal. And I am going to highlight this picture and then we'll shift it over and go look at this application first. But the target here is using, an Office 365 SharePoint page, sharing that with customers, employees, and vendors, as I mentioned, really whoever I want. If they're external users, then they don't require licenses. If they're within my domain, aka employees, then they will require a license. And integrating that platform or that sharing with the data that exists in your CRM or ERP system. And then the bottom arch you see there, that's basically all of the functionality of Office 365 that is complementing this solution. So let's get out of the PowerPoint presentation and we will go ahead and share my desktop. Okay, so just a quick note on this, and I could send this out if everyone's interested as well, as we are leveraging this, again, this wave, if you will, or this concept that's being pushed by Microsoft. So this is the premise of this idea of using SharePoint as a business-to-business Action Edge solution. And you could find this article. It is available on Microsoft's site. You could easily search on it. It's probably the first hit. But they go over the benefits of what it is that we're trying to do. And generally speaking, the biggest benefit is this is something that you'd have to build from scratch back in the day, right? If I wanted a portal application, I would have to design it, get a web developer, build it, build the integrations, etc. They are providing this framework. So this is the concept that I wish I could take credit for inventing, but I didn't. It's obviously something that Microsoft is pushing. And we are going to leverage that together with our portal application. So the first one that we are showcasing today is a customer portal. And the thing to note is all these use cases that I'm about to cover are using the same app, right? They're all still using our same portal application, which is enabling that integration to Dynamics 365, either Business Central. We do have customer engagement as well as finance and operations. So here is a SharePoint extranet page. You could probably, just notice it is a modern site, so it is responsive. I have various calls to actions. In other words, I'm bringing customers into the site. I'm going to collaborate with them, and here's the things that I want them to look at and collaborate with, such things as orders, invoices, returns. If I scroll down a little bit, I could see such things as my contact details within the company. I can see an integrated Power BI report, which is actually being filtered based on the authenticated user. And then lastly, just a simple newsfeed document library, right? It's a newsfeed. I could post things there saying what's going on with the company, our new featured products, etc. Maybe, contact support at this number. And then if I go into the document library, I'm showcasing such things as the statements of works and contracts that are specific to that customer. So it could be specific to a customer or it could just be a template that I want them to use or download. So those are the various options. Now again, this is all available Office 365 out of the box. If we start clicking on these icons, it's going to pull the data from Dynamics 365. In addition to pulling that information, it is also filtering it based off of this user that's integrated or authenticated with Office 365, aka the person who logged in. So here I am seeing the sales orders that are applicable to my user, right? And I could click on these various actions, go into them, look at the line items associated to it. So if I ever wanted to share my orders with a given customer, now they're available at their fingertips. As you can see here, I am doing sort of basic just sharing. I'm not allowing any edit capability. I am giving them the ability to click a print button. That print button is rendering the report in a real-time fashion from Dynamics 365. So this is the sales order report, which we just called in a real-time fashion and rendered as a PDF. Reason PDF, of course, it works across virtually all devices. If I was looking at this on a phone or desktop computer, or of course a tablet, a PDF is typically something that is recognized by all browsers. So that's sort of a simple, right? I just want to show my orders, get them in there, as opposed to calling me on the phone and saying, hey, what's the status, what's going on there? They could just see it all now, right? They could just access it 24/7 at their fingertips. Let's start talking about more sophisticated cases, invoices. Maybe I want them to see their invoices, maybe even pay invoices. right? That would be nice. So here I could go into my open invoices, drill into them, and then actually have the ability to pay it if they want, using different payment providers, including like Authorize.net and the larger providers out there. Sales orders, maybe in addition to seeing them, I want them to place orders. So placing orders is an interesting concept. As you note that this is a B2B portal, right? So this isn't taking the place of like an e-commerce solution or like an Amazon experience. There's no shopping cart. This is creating an order by basically giving them a simplified order entry form as if it were within Dynamics 365, but of course I'm going to make it more simple. I don't want to give them the whole order screen. I want to give them a very simplistic version. So here you can see it called the web services. Our integration again is with web services. I should stop and introduce that. So the portal is not storing any data per se. It is truly just interacting with the web services and the information that exists in Dynamics 365. So when I created that order, it actually called the system and allowed it to default all the customer information, such as bill to and ship to. And then I could go in and, of course, add items. And I'd probably want to filter these, only give my customers a very specific item list based on the things that are set up for them or that have been pre-configured for them. And, of course, submit it. So again, as you can see, it's a collaboration portal. It's not intended to be an e-commerce solution. It's not intended to be an Amazon experience. It's allowing me to share data as it exists. As you can see here, I did get a new workflow associated to that. Any changes in the portal could actually go through a workflow before they're integrated with Dynamics 365 or occur immediately. At the very least, we'd probably want notifications, right? So it did kick off a new notification here saying I've changed some items on an order as well as created a new order. So of course, if my customers are in here placing new orders, I probably want to notify someone, give them at least an email, maybe something even more aggressive, such as a text message, etc., such that they could jump on it and actually take action. So that's creating an order. Let's actually get out of the customer portal. There's a couple more things to mention. One is the company information, if they change addresses and things like that, their profile, if they want to add a new user. Service orders we're going to look at a second, so I'll skip that one. But of course, all of this is configurable is the thing to note. The portal Office 365 is providing this framework for the collaboration. The data that you want to share and enable is obviously very specific to your customers and your business. So let's go into the vendor portal. Same idea, as you could probably see, it looks very similar. As opposed to such things as purchase orders, what would I want to collaborate on a vendor basis? I'm sorry, as opposed to sales orders, for vendors, it's probably going to be more like purchase orders that I'd want to collaborate with and give them access to see the POs that are open for them. Maybe drill into these POs, do such things as change the expected delivery date, like it's going to be behind schedule. And I want to go ahead and acknowledge that if I'm not doing EDI or some more sophisticated integration with my vendors, I could acknowledge that from the portal and then go ahead and update it. Of course, in this case, I'd probably want to kick off a workflow because I have vendors updating the purchase order, which could impact things downstream from the supply chain. Here, as opposed to looking at customer invoices, of course, they're looking at vendor invoices. So they're probably not going to pay me for these because I'm paying them. But if I wanted to, I could show them the status of what's been paid and what's open, etc. So they could come right in there and not call my accounting department or anything, but click on the button and see what the status of that invoice is. So we'll keep it going. A few more examples on the portal side. Service cases, as I mentioned, right? So if I want to do more of a service portal, and this could be integrated with the service modules within 365 from both the ERP and CRM side. So I could create a service call. As you notice, my entry screens are usually pretty simple, right? We don't want to give the customer the access to everything because their eyes would probably roll back in the head. We want to give them a very limited view. So we could go ahead and create that, kick off workflow, etc. Again, the workflow is using Power Automate, so there's all kinds of functionality there. I did receive another email notification, but we've had people with requests of can I call my cell phone and do things like that. And with Power Automate, so much of that is capable with that workflow. Keep it going past the service portal, supplier portal. If you're a manufacturing organization, maybe I want to see. So this actually is an interesting use case. So it's a manufacturing example. And as you can see, my calls to action are such things as inventory and production orders, which may be applicable to like contract manufacturers, maybe my customers, if I want to give them that much insight into my operations. Or this could be something that's more internally facing. So my employees could see the status of orders and things like that. So they could see production orders. If I were to click on the print icon here, as opposed to calling a PO or an SO, I'm going to create or call a component and routing report. So in this case, the data, of course, is more operations focused than either purchasing or sales oriented. And one last example in that realm is job cost. Right, so if I want to give internal employees access to jobs, subcontractors, they can see various job statuses, go into them, see where the percentage is complete on that, look at the various details, etc. The other thing to note here is we do have various search capabilities. So I've obviously just been going into data from a grid perspective, but if I want to have subcontractors being able to be searched here, I can most certainly enable that, as well as attach such things as documentation and submit that through the portal as well. So when this document is routed, I could obviously select a file from my computer. It could be routed for approval and then integrated directly with Dynamics 365. So I can automate the submission of various contracts and things of that nature through the portal. Okay, so enough of the collaboration idea and sharing information. The thing to note from that, or the things to take, is that any of that information is possible to share. But what if I want to automate an entire business process? And the one that I have showcased here is the concept of a vendor onboarding. So I have a Microsoft form here that's been just plugged into a web part in SharePoint, and it has my vendor name and my email, and I'm going to submit that. And what that's going to do is kick off a whole vendor onboarding process, including such things as review and approval, etc. So you probably heard my phone beep, and what happened there is me as a vendor received an email. And the email was actually integrated from an Office 365 action, or flow action, I should say, by the name of DocuSign, which we're hopefully all familiar with. And it sent me a contract. The reason that we initiated that through DocuSign is because I want to actually capture an electronic signature here. So here you can see it's my new vendor request. So this would be my new vendor onboarding form. As you can tell, it is being presented by the DocuSign web part. I can ask for various information, of which I'm not going to bore you today. And if I scroll down, I have a W-9 and, of course, an electronic signature associated to it. So in this case, I'm not capturing this information from an email perspective. It's automatically being initiated to them. And when I complete this, it's actually going to kick off a workflow for that vendor to be reviewed and approved. And then ultimately, that vendor is invited back into the portal. So you can see here, excuse me, it kicked off a workflow using, again, Power Automate. Power Automate, by the way, I could review these from email. I could review them from Teams. So if I were to bring over my Teams application, you can see here I have new tasks assigned. I could also do it from my mobile app as well. There's all these various plugins throughout the Microsoft products with Power Automate. So there's my new vendor request here. Of course, I'm going to want to see the form that they completed. I actually have a saved one, so you didn't have to watch me type it in. There's that form that was presented, as well as the W-9. And then I could approve or reject it. In this case, I have a pretty simple workflow. It's only one tier of approval, just for the sake of moving through this in a timely fashion. But that's going to go ahead and kick off an email to the vendor, welcoming them to the portal and presenting them with an invite to click. So here it is. As you can see, my email is really basic. I could probably pretty this up a little bit. But if I click on Vendor Portal, the vendor now gets welcome to the portal where they can see their purchase orders. So obviously the goal of this is, enabling data collaboration, but you could take it a step further using this DocuSign integration with Power Automate and integrate whole business processes as well. Okay, that was enough of our portal examples. We are going to go back to the presentation. And looks like I should stop sharing my screen. Go back to the presentation and talk about that same concept, but in this case, we're going to look at it from invoice automation. So this is a little bit different in that we are going to receive invoices from a vendor. We're going to receive them into Office 365. We're going to route them for approval, do all kinds of great things, and then lastly, integrate with Dynamics 365. And I'm running out of time here, so we're going to make this really quick. We could go ahead and share this application.
Mike, there was one question here for you. What is the major difference between Powerapps Portal and the SharePoint portal?
Great question. The Powerapps Portal is an interesting product. It's recently introduced, and its main goal, if you will, from a application perspective is to target it, or I believe Microsoft plans to expand it, but historically speaking, it has been only for CRM. That's sort of its history. If you know, it was bought out from another company, made a portal product as part of Powerapps, and its legacy, if you will, is CRM integration. The main difference between that is if you look at, a Power App, obviously, even if Microsoft expanded that to integrate with other products, it's really focused on the app itself and the integration with data, right? And the portal, the integration with data is really just a small component of that, right? Like we're bringing in other things such as document libraries and news feeds, etc. So one, to answer the question in sort of a cliche sense is one is an app. You think about the things that you use from an app perspective, creating orders, very, specific transactions. Where a portal is usually this window into so much other things, which could then have those little applications as well. Is that it, Shauna?
Yes, that was the only question right now. Thank you.
And I think I have 3 more minutes, right? If my watch is right?
Correct.
Okay, invoice automation. So this is basically a 3-step process, if you will, that we are going to receive an invoice into a SharePoint library. And I have one submitted right here. And I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. Consulting invoice. I'm going to click send, and it's going to come into this library for me. And what it's going to do is initiate a workflow. And the workflow is going to be based on, again, Power Automate, and it's going to route this for review and approval using the workflow configuration that I have, and then ultimately integrate it with Dynamics 365. So you can see that one was just created here. So here's my invoice coming into the system. As you note here, I captured some metadata on it, such as the company name, and there's a few blank columns. If we actually had a few minutes, we would see those propagate because the invoice has been submitted to an OCR process. And that OCR process is going to bring back the values here and populate the data. The OCR product is using, again, a Power Automate integrated OCR tools, which there's several out there on the marketplace, and it has connections already established. So if I give it a few minutes, which probably I don't have time for right now, I would see that data populate. From there, that data is going to come directly into a dashboard that we've created, and that is going to assign the accounting elements, such things as dimensions, accounts, etc. Ultimately, the workflow, routing for approval, and then lastly, bringing that in as an invoice. So if you can see, here's my invoices. After it comes into that library, it gets created in our application. And I have my various dimensions and things of that nature assigned. And then I could kick it off for a workflow to review and approve it. So it's an AP processing dashboard, again, using Office 365 as a framework. And the last one that we had was an expense report. It's the same idea, but a different interface, such that we have employees creating expenses, again, using Power Automate for workflow. And then lastly, integrating as an invoice in Dynamics 365. And I will go ahead and stop that sharing and bring it back to our last slide. And I think I am at time here, and I will hand it back to you, Sean.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you to everybody that attended. Was there any last minute questions or comments for Mike? Okay, I don't think so. Well, just a couple last minute reminders. If you could please take a couple seconds before you exit out and rate the session. You'll find that star rating just above the presentation screen under the description. And then you will find the session recording and materials in the Focus Community Library, hopefully by end of day, if not by the end of the event. So thank you so much again, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you also for joining. Have a great time.